Good afternoon, everyone. I have to start by telling you I'm a lousy Crusader. At least that's what I used to think, like a little bit of a fraud. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm a proud Crusader, proud to be joining you in celebrating coeducation here at Holy Cross, proud to be the daughter of the director of admissions who had the privilege of selecting the brave and exceptional women in those early classes who blazed the trail, many of whom I suspect are here today. And proud to be kicking off this series of CrossTalks, as Cassie said, where members of the Holy Cross community will share some learning across generations, across disciplines, across industries. Perfect idea for the cross. But however, as I said, in the past, I've felt like a little bit of a fraud. Men and women for others. It's an undeniably aspirational, eminently admirable call, but for a long time I didn't feel like one. I graduated with a major in French and quickly sold out, got a job in advertising, of all things, selling stuff to people. Sugary cereal, expensive sneakers, fruit snacks, and some good things, some educational materials, some medicine, yogurts, but I didn't do JVC. I didn't become a physician or a teacher. I chose to make ads. How could I call myself a woman for others? So I engaged in a bunch of compensatory activities to bolster the tally sheet where I was sure God was keeping score on how well I lived the Jesuit mission. I volunteered here at Holy Cross, at my son's school, in the community. I wrote some checks to a variety of things. But still, was I living up to the call? I just was haunted by the thought that I wasn't doing it right. And then one day, something shifted. I remember it vividly. I was preparing for a meeting of the board of directors of my company. I was in my office, head down, reviewing the numbers, rehearsing the answers to every question I expected they would ask me, like, why was the gross margin improvement shy of the previous years? Or what were you planning to do to offset those decreases in client budgets? Like, a lot of fun for the French major, right? But I had my attention on the numbers, and then one of the junior folks on our team came to my door. She was lit up. She said, Julie, I know you're busy, but do you have a minute? Like, of course, come on in. Anything to not look at the numbers. And she proceeded to tell me about an idea that she had. Now, I think it's important to understand her job wasn't in what we call the creative department at an advertising agency. She was in the account management department, which is where people interface with clients, manage budgets, timetables. But the idea she had was a promotional program for one of our food clients. It was an idea where kids could mail in their proofs of purchase and get a baby tree that they could plant and do something good for the environment. She'd figured out how to fund it, where to source the trees, how to tie it to the brand's business objectives, how to measure success. She had figured it all out, and she was beaming. Now, my shift had little to do with the idea itself, which was very good, by the way, and the client did it, and it blew the doors off, statistically. It was a huge success. But my shift had to do with the light that I saw in her eyes. When I saw how lit up she was, I had a new idea about what this agency I was running might really be all about. Sure, I had to deliver the numbers, make a profit, win ad awards, all of that, but really, the really of it was that I was running a company where people could work and have that thrill, the thrill of having a new idea. The thrill that comes with the energy and goosebumps that sort of seem to come from the inside out when we land on something new. You've probably had this experience, right? It's like, where did that come from? And then I realized, well, maybe with all these spreadsheets in front of me, I'm not in the advertising business. Maybe I'm in the goosebumps business. Now stay with me on this. I started to think more about this idea of goosebumps. And I asked the question again, well, what business is that, really? Why would we have a physiological skin reaction to something as simple as having a new idea? It was then that I was reminded of something I heard during the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius with Father Lebrun in 1982. Even after all these years, I remember being struck by the idea that God needed us, And that was why he created us, that we were his creative product, his creative expression in the world. And as odd of a leap as it may seem, when I thought about running a creative agency, I wondered if those goosebumps that we feel when we have a flash of creative brilliance that seems to come out of nowhere, if those goosebumps might just be evidence of the presence of God in our lives. Now, all of a sudden, I started thinking being creative is something we have in common with God and could be a way to get closer to him. Now, Lord knows I didn't have the courage to say this during my TED Talk or on the stage of advertising conferences where I speak, but I figured I could float the idea here. What if the act of creativity is a way for us to know God? Not just at church or in prayer, but in the everyday work that we do, in those moments that we have to express our creativity. And once I started considering this perspective, so much shifted. Instead of getting bogged down and depleted and exhausted by numbers and spreadsheets and contracts, I was actually energized by the playful possibility of what might come from every member of our team. I realized my job wasn't just about delivering a profit and winning awards. My job was actually to create the space for others to have their goosebumps moments that come from having a new idea. So when I saw how powerful this shift was for me, I started to ask this question of my clients: what business are you in, really? Now, I didn't expect most people to say, I'm in the business of helping people to know God, but I did start to notice a pattern to some of the answers. Let me share a couple of examples with you. I was working with a colleague who owned a group of restaurants in New York. And I asked him this question: what business are you in? He said, well, I'm in the restaurant business or the hospitality business. But we kept playing with it, poking at it. And what he realized is he was actually in the transportation business. People came into his restaurants and were transported, not just by the food and the wine, but by every intentional decision he made: the lighting, the music, the cutlery, the placemats, all contributed to this sense of being transported. And when he realized this and lived through that vision for his business, the morale among his staff was high, he was able to attract the best talent, and then ultimately, of course, great ratings on OpenTable. There's another story I heard. I wish I could remember the source, but it's such a great example of how powerful it is to ask this question. I wanted to share it with you. So the story goes like this. A gentleman was asked about his work. What do you do? He said, I help sick people feel better. Oh, you work in a hospital? Yes, I do, he said. A particular part of the hospital? Do you specialize? He said, well, I mostly work in the ICU. Oh my, you must have to pay attention to a lot of details. He said, oh yeah, all the time. Where'd you go to school? He said, oh, I went to the local high school here in town. Oh no, I'm sorry, I meant where'd you go to med school? I didn't go to med school. Well, where'd you go to college? Nope, never went. Well, I don't understand. How do you help people feel better? He said, well, my job is to clean the ICU every night after the patients fall asleep and their families go home. And I know that when they wake up and the families return, if they come into a clean, good-smelling, orderly room, they may feel better even for just a minute. The man was a custodian. But imagine how different it must have felt to wake up in the morning, know that walking into this hospital to clean God knows what off the floor, right? Imagine that job was actually helping people to feel better. That was his really. Another example, a pharmaceutical client of mine had a new medication for a disease that made it hard for people to swallow their food. They couldn't swallow it. Terrible disease. Now you might think, oh, come on. Healthcare, the really of healthcare is certainly to help people feel better. True. However, the team working on this new launch just wasn't inspired. They were bogged down with clinical trials, FDA label restrictions, insurance coverage. It was just weighing so heavily, no goosebumps for them. So the leader asked me during a brand workshop, what could we do to inspire our team? So we asked this question. Well, what business do we think we're in really? Of course, the first thing everybody said is, we're in the swallowing business, right? But the more we talked about it, what they realized is with this medication, people would be able to do something that they can't do right now, which is sit at a table with friends and family, break bread, and make lasting memories. They were in the breaking bread with family business, in the memory-making business, not the swallowing business. Much more inspirational, right? You could see how that would make a difference to the team. So goosebumps, transportation, making memories with friends and family. None of these are the obvious answers to the question, what business are you in really? But all of these answers have one thing in common. They shift the focus from what we do to whom we serve, how others are benefited by the work we do. Others, there's that word. Maybe I can consider myself a woman for others. So I've come to love this question. It has the potential to elevate the mundane, the things that wear us down, to something more inspired, more sacred, more of what we Crusaders might consider a calling. And it can remind us that we are, in fact, men and women for others. Now, one more thing about this question. It's not just something you can ask if you work in business or if you're running a brand. It's something anybody can ask. Over the years, I've heard friends of mine say, I feel like a taxi driver. All I do is take my kids to practice and soccer and rehearsals and doctor's appointments. Well, I wonder how those car rides might have felt if instead of considering that they were in the taxi business, they thought, I'm in the giving my kids a good start in life business, or I'm in the quality one-on-one time with my teenager business. I think you get the idea. So for me, the power in asking this question, what business am I in really, really, was transformative. With it, I realized I can't call myself a Crusader. I can call myself a woman for others because as I've shared with you, I'm actually not in the advertising business at all. I'm in the goosebumps business. My purpose is to create the environment for others to access their creative spark, to have those goosebumps moments that come when they discover something new, land on an idea or an insight that's so surprising, so interesting, so revelatory that it leaves some evidence on the skin that it's something worth paying attention to. So, my fellow Crusaders, I offer the question to you, what business are you in, really? I'll close with this quote from the theologian Howard Thurman. I have it on my office wall. It says, don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive and go do it. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive. I believe that what makes us come alive, what lights us up, is the way that we can be the light for others. And what's more Crusader-like than that? Thank you.